On Christmas Eve, my daughter said, "Mom, you should leave, you bring the mood down." When everyone opened their gifts and found handwritten letters inside, no one had the courage to look me in the eye. "Your presence here means so much to me. Watch until the end and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached. Mom, it's better if you go. You're bringing down the mood." My daughter Caroline's words hit me like a slap across the face. I stood frozen in her elegant living room, still holding the homemade apple pie I'd spent hours baking that morning. "I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, my voice suddenly small and foreign to my own ears. Caroline sighed, that familiar exasperated sound I'd grown to dread. She glanced nervously at her husband Mark, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting the Christmas tree ornaments. "It's just, everyone's trying to have a good time. You've been talking about your arthritis and complaining about the cold since you arrived." She lowered her voice. The kids were so excited about Christmas Eve, and now they're getting all mopey. I looked around the room at my grandchildren, who didn't seem mopey at all as they played with their new toys. My son-in-law's parents laughed in the corner, glasses of eggnog in hand. My son David and his wife Jennifer were huddled on the couch, whispering about something. I didn't realize I was complaining," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was just making conversation." Caroline took the pie from my hands and set it on the coffee table. "Let's not make a scene, okay? We'll call you a cab. You should rest anyway, it's getting late." It was only 8:30 p.m. As Caroline walked away to call the cab, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the side table near each family member was a handwritten letter with beautiful red envelopes. They must have exchanged them while I was in the bathroom. Everyone had received one, everyone except me. When I looked up, I caught David's eye. He quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in his phone. Jennifer pretended to be fixing the bow on a present. No one would meet my gaze. "Your cab will be here in 10 minutes, Caroline announced, returning to the room. She handed me my coat and purse, clearly eager to usher me out. "What about the letters?" I asked quietly. "Did I miss the exchange?" The room went silent. Caroline's cheeks flushed. "Oh, they're just silly little notes we decided to write to each other this year. Nothing important. But they were important enough that I couldn't be included." I put on my coat with trembling hands. 72 years old, and being sent home from Christmas Eve like a misbehaving child. No one protested. No one said, "Caroline, don't be ridiculous, Mom should stay." Not even David, who I'd always thought was more sensitive. Caroline walked me to the door. "The cab will warm up soon," she said brightly, as if this were all perfectly normal. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" "Merry Christmas," I said softly. She gave me a quick, stiff hug and closed the door behind me. The December air bit through my coat as I waited on the porch. Through the window, I could see the family resuming their celebration. Caroline was laughing at something Mark said. David was opening another gift with his children. It was as if my departure had lifted a weight from the room, just as Caroline had implied. The cab arrived, and I gave the driver my address. As we pulled away from the house glowing with Christmas lights and warmth, I felt a hollowness spreading through my chest. "Bad night?" the driver asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Just tired," I replied. But the truth was something different. I was 72 years old, a widow for nearly 30 years. I'd raised Caroline and David alone after Robert died of a heart attack at 45. I'd worked 2 jobs to put them through college. I'd babysit my grandchildren whenever asked, often dropping everything to help. And tonight, on Christmas Eve, I'd been told I was unwanted. When I arrived home, I entered my small, dark house. No Christmas tree this year. I'd thought I'd be spending the holiday with family. The silence pressed in around me as I hung up my coat. On the mantel were photos of Caroline and David growing up, Caroline's graduation, David's wedding, all the milestones. Had I really been such a burden all these years without realizing it? I sat on my couch in the dark, not bothering to turn on the lights. The pain in my chest wasn't arthritis this time. It was the realization that the family I'd sacrificed everything for didn't want me around, at least not the real me, with my aches and my stories and my imperfections. As tears slid down my cheeks, I wondered what exactly had been written in those letters that they couldn't bear to let me see. Christmas morning arrived with a cruel stillness. No excited calls from grandchildren, no family bustling through my door with armfuls of presents. Just the ticking of the old grandfather clock Robert had restored before he died. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone that hadn't rung. Caroline had promised to call. She wouldn't forget, would she? By noon, when no call had come, I decided to distract myself. I climbed the rickety steps to my attic, where boxes of old memories gathered dust. Perhaps I'd been holding on to the past too tightly. Perhaps it was time to let go. The first box I opened contained David's baby clothes. I ran my fingers over the tiny blue sweater I'd knitted during my lunch breaks at the diner. Back then, I'd worked mornings at the bank and evenings serving coffee and pie, coming home with swollen ankles and aching feet. The next box held Caroline's report cards. Straight A's, every year. Your daughter is exceptionally bright, her teachers always said. And she was. I'd scraped together every penny to buy her the encyclopedia set she wanted, going without new shoes for myself that winter. Deeper in the attic, I found a dusty shoebox I'd almost forgotten about. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, that I'd written to Caroline and David during those years when exhaustion kept me from being as present as I wanted to be. Dear Caroline, I'm sorry I missed your piano recital today. Mrs. Abernathy said you played beautifully. I wanted so much to be there, but Mr. Geller wouldn't let me leave early. I've put a slice of chocolate cake in the fridge for you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. I'd written these notes when they were sleeping, leaving them on their pillows or in their lunchboxes. Little bridges trying to connect the gaps my constant working created. Another letter caught my eye. Dear David, I saw you helping Mrs. Wilson with her groceries today. You didn't know I was driving by, but I saw you. You have your father's kind heart. I'm working late again tonight, but I've left your favorite meatloaf in the oven. Don't forget your math homework. Love, Mom. As I read through these faded papers, memories flooded back, not just of my absences, but of the reasons behind them. After Robert died, I was drowning in medical bills and a half-paid mortgage. His life insurance barely covered the funeral. I had 2 young children and no college degree, just a determination that they would have the opportunities one never had. There was the winter the furnace broke, and I secretly pawned my wedding ring to pay for repairs. The summer Caroline needed braces, when I sold the antique dining set that had been my grandmother's. The countless nights I mended clothes instead of buying new ones, the meals stretched with extra potatoes and less meat. All those sacrifices, invisible to my children. All they saw was a mother who wasn't there enough, who came home tired, who sometimes fell asleep during their stories. Near the bottom of the box, I found a worn photograph. Me at 35, with Caroline and David on either side. Dark circles under my eyes, hair hastily pulled back, but I was smiling. They were smiling too, ice cream cones in hand. I remembered that day. I'd picked up an extra shift washing dishes at the diner specifically to treat them to ice cream at the fancy parlor that had just opened. Caroline had complained that other mothers took their kids for ice cream all the time. She didn't understand that those other mothers had husbands with good jobs, family money, or college degrees. I never told her how many hours I'd worked for those 3 ice cream cones. I didn't want her to feel the weight of our circumstances. Maybe that was my mistake. I protected them from the harsh realities, taken on all the burdens myself. I never explained why I couldn't attend every school event or why we couldn't afford the brand name clothes Caroline coveted. I'd thought I was sparing them, but instead, I'd allowed them to build a narrative where I was simply an absent, tired mother who didn't care enough to be present. The sun was setting when I finally closed the last box. My phone had remained silent all day. I made myself a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, surrounded by the ghosts of Christmas past, All those years when I'd scraped together enough for a turkey and presents, when I'd stayed up late wrapping gifts and filling stockings, only to wake up early for a morning shift. As I washed my single plate and fork, I came to a decision. The past couldn't be changed, but perhaps the future could. I wouldn't call Caroline or David to remind them they'd forgotten me on Christmas Day. I wouldn't plead for inclusion or explain my sacrifices from decades ago. Instead, I would do something I'd never allowed myself before, would put myself first. The thought was so foreign it almost made me dizzy. For 30 years, every decision I'd made had been for my children. Every penny saved, every hour worked, every opportunity declined, all for them. But now, as I stood alone in my kitchen on Christmas night, I realized they no longer needed my sacrifices. And perhaps I no longer needed to make them. 3 days after Christmas, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Caroline and David still hadn't called, and I'd made peace with that fact, or at least was trying to. When I opened the door, I found my 16-year-old grandson, Ethan, standing on my porch, his cheeks red from the cold. "Grandma," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, surprised but pleased. "Of course, honey. Is everything okay?" Ethan shrugged off his coat, revealing a faded Star Wars t-shirt. Though he'd grown taller than me in the past year, there was something vulnerable in his posture. "I took the bus," he said, as if that explained everything. "Mom doesn't know I'm here." I led him to the kitchen and put on the kettle. Ethan had always been partial to hot chocolate, even as he'd outgrown other childhood comforts. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He shook his head, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out a crumpled red envelope. "I brought this for you." My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it as one of the Christmas letters from Caroline's house. "Where did you get this?" "It's yours," he said simply. "The one they didn't give you." My hands trembled slightly as I took the envelope. "I don't understand. They wrote me a letter after all?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Not exactly. Uncle David wrote it. About you, not to you. Everyone got one." I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the envelope weighing in my hands like a stone. "What do you mean, about me?" Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's better if you just read it." I didn't think it was right. What they did. The kettle whistled, but I ignored it. With stiff fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside, written in my son's neat handwriting. "Dear family. This Christmas, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, Mom. As you all know, her negativity and constant complaints have become increasingly difficult to manage at family gatherings. Caroline and I have discussed this at length, and we believe it's time to consider limiting her involvement in family events, for everyone's sake. The constant stories about her health issues, her financial struggles, which are entirely self-inflicted through poor management, and her outdated opinions make it hard to enjoy our limited family time. Many of you have mentioned feeling drained after spending time with her. We suggest using this holiday as a transition point. We'll invite her for the gift exchange, but Caroline will ask her to leave before dinner. Moving forward, we should consider rotating responsibility for including her in holidays rather than having her at all family gatherings. I know this sounds harsh, but Mom has always been difficult. Those of you who remember her when we were growing up know she was often absent or too tired to be truly present. Now that we have our own families, we shouldn't feel obligated to sacrifice our happiness for someone who never really prioritized ours. Please keep this letter private. We'll discuss further at New Year's, which will be mom-free. Wishing you all a drama-free Christmas, David." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I set the letter down carefully, as if it might bite. The kitchen seemed to spin around me. "Grandma?" Ethan's voice broke through the roaring in my ears. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, then another. How did you get this?" "Everyone got one in their gifts. I didn't open mine until later." His voice cracked slightly. It didn't seem right. The things Uncle David said weren't true. At least, they didn't match what I know about you. I looked at my grandson, really looked at him. 16, with his grandfather's kind eyes and thoughtful manner. While the adults in the family had apparently been conspiring to edge me out, this boy had ridden a bus across town to bring me the truth. "Thank you for showing me this," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. Ethan fidgeted with his mug. "Are you going to confront them?" I considered the question carefully. The old me, the one who had spent decades trying to please her children, make up for perceived shortcomings, prove her worth, would have called David immediately, hurt and defensive, begging for explanation and inclusion. But that woman seemed very far away now. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I will." "But they lied about you," Ethan protested. "They planned to kick you out before you even arrived." I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. "Some truths speak for themselves, Ethan. This letter tells me everything I need to know." I stood up and finally made the hot chocolate, adding extra marshmallows to Ethan's mug. As I set it before him, I felt a strange sense of clarity washing over me. "What will you do?" he asked, watching me carefully. I smiled, a real smile despite the pain still throbbing in my chest. "I'm going to live my life. And I think it's time for some changes." As we sipped our drinks, I realized I'd been given an unexpected gift, the harsh truth, yes, but also the freedom that comes with finally seeing things as they really are. After Ethan left, with a promise to visit again soon that felt more genuine than any words my children had offered in years, I sat alone with the letter. Reading it a second time didn't lessen the sting, but it clarified my path forward. My fingers moved almost automatically as I reached for the phone and dialed my friend Eleanor. We'd grown close at the senior center's watercolor class I'd joined last spring, one of the few indulgences I'd permitted myself after decades of thrift. "Linda?" Eleanor's warm voice answered. "Merry belated Christmas." "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," I said hesitantly. "Just me and a glass of sherry watching reruns." "What's on your mind?" I didn't know where to begin. How do you explain to someone that your entire family had conspired to remove you from their lives? That your own son had described you as a burden to be managed? Remember that senior exchange program you mentioned? The one in Italy? I asked instead. The cultural immersion program? Of course. I've been thinking about applying myself. Why, are you interested? I am, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Very interested. Well, that's wonderful. Eleanor exclaimed. Applications are due by January 15th. It's for 6 months, you know. Quite a commitment. 6 months sounds perfect, I replied. A semester away from the life I'd built around people who didn't want me in it. 6 months to rediscover who I was beyond being a mother and grandmother. Linda, what happened? Eleanor asked, her voice gentler now. Last time we talked, you were excited about spending the holidays with your family. I hesitated, then decided on the truth. They asked me to leave. Apparently, I'm a burden. What? The outrage in Eleanor's voice was somehow validating. That's terrible. On Christmas? Christmas Eve, actually. I managed a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. I've been reevaluating things since then. Well, Italy sounds like exactly what you need. A complete change of scenery. After we hung up, I went to my bedroom and opened my closet. In the back, behind winter coats and old dresses, was the safe where I kept my important documents. Inside, alongside my will and the deed to my house, was my savings account statement. I'd never told my children about this account. After Robert died, I'd been so terrified of leaving Caroline and David vulnerable that I'd saved obsessively, putting away small amounts from every paycheck, building a cushion that had grown over 30 years of careful management. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help with emergencies, enough to supplement my modest pension. Enough, as it turned out, for Italy. The next morning, I woke with purpose. I printed the application for the senior exchange program and filled it out carefully. I called my doctor to schedule a checkup and get the necessary health clearance. I dusted off my old Italian phrasebook from the community college course I'd taken 15 years ago but abandoned when David's son was born and childcare was needed. 3 days into my planning, my phone finally rang. Caroline's name flashed on the screen. I answered, my voice neutral. "Mom, I've been meaning to call," she said, no apology in her tone. "Things have been so hectic after Christmas." "I'm sure they have," I replied. "We're planning a small get-together for New Year's Eve. Nothing fancy, just family. Would you like to come?" I visualized David's letter, circulated to everyone at Christmas. "We'll discuss further at New Year's, which will be mom-free." "Thank you for the invitation," I said calmly, "but I have other plans." "Other plans?" Caroline sounded genuinely surprised, as if she couldn't imagine me having a life outside of waiting for their invitations. "What other plans?" "I'm preparing for a trip." "A trip? Where?" The disbelief in her voice was almost comical. "Italy. I've applied for a 6-month cultural exchange program." Silence stretched over the line. I could almost hear Caroline's thoughts racing, recalibrating. "Mom, are you serious? What about your house? Your doctor's appointments? Who's going to water your plants?" I couldn't help but smile at the sudden concern for my welfare, or rather, for the disruption my independence might cause to their plans. "I've thought it all through," I assured her. "The house will be fine. My health is good. And I'm sure my plants will survive." "Does this have something to do with Christmas Eve?" Caroline's voice had taken on a defensive edge. "Because if you're upset about leaving early." "This has to do with me," I interrupted gently. "Just me." After we hung up, I returned to sorting through my belongings. What would I need in Italy? What could I leave behind? What could I give away entirely? The doorbell rang as I was boxing up old winter clothes for donation. When I opened it, I found David standing on my porch, his expression a mix of concern and irritation. "Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk about this Italy nonsense." I closed the door behind him, noticing how he surveyed the boxes with narrowed eyes. "What exactly is there to talk about?" I asked. David sighed dramatically. "Caroline says you're planning to go away for 6 months. That's not realistic. What if the kids need you? What if there's an emergency?" I thought about pointing out that according to his letter, I was a burden they were planning to rotate responsibility for, hardly someone they'd call in an emergency. But instead, I simply said, "I'll be a phone call away, same as always." "Is this about Christmas Eve?" he demanded, echoing his sister. "Because you're blowing that way out of proportion." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy I'd raised alone, the man who'd decided I was disposable. "David," I said quietly, "this isn't about Christmas Eve. This is about the next chapter of my life. I'm 72 years old. If not now, when?" He had no answer for that. The email confirming my acceptance into the Italian cultural exchange for seniors arrived on a rainy February morning. I read it 3 times, each time feeling a surge of disbelief followed by something I hadn't felt in years, pure, unbridled excitement. I'd been accepted. In 6 weeks, I would be living in a small town in Tuscany, staying with a local host family and immersing myself in Italian culture. My phone rang almost immediately after I forwarded the confirmation to Eleanor. "You did it," she exclaimed. "Linda, we're going to Italy." "We?" I couldn't keep the smile from my voice. "You got in too?" "Just got my email. We're in the same town, Montepulciano. Can you believe it?" Having Eleanor there would make everything easier. Though we'd only been friends for less than a year, she had quickly become my closest confidant, especially after the Christmas debacle. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. I put my bills on autopay, arranged for a neighbor's college-age son to check on the house periodically, and started packing. I also made an appointment with my lawyer to update my will, something long overdue. My children's reactions to my impending departure ranged from disbelief to thinly veiled accusations. "I can't believe you're actually going through with this," Caroline said during a tense lunch where she'd interrogated me about my arrangements as if I were a teenager going on spring break. "What if something happens to you over there?" "The program has comprehensive health coverage," I assured her. "And I'm perfectly healthy." "That's not what you said at Christmas," she muttered. "You talked about your arthritis all night." I took a slow sip of water. "My arthritis is manageable. My doctor has cleared me for travel." David was more direct in his concerns. "Mom, be reasonable. You've never traveled internationally before. You don't speak Italian. You've never even lived with roommates. How do you expect to stay with strangers in a foreign country?" "I took Italian classes years ago," I reminded him. "And I'm quite looking forward to the adventure." "Adventure," he repeated, making the word sound ridiculous. "At your age." Only Ethan seemed genuinely happy for me. He came over one afternoon with a travel guide to Tuscany he'd bought with his own money. "This is so cool, Grandma," he said, flipping through the pages. "You have to try the wild boar pasta. It says it's a specialty there." "I'll send you pictures of everything I eat," I promised. He hesitated, then asked, "Are you going because of what Dad wrote in that letter?" I considered my answer carefully. "That was part of it," I admitted. "But mostly, I'm going because I want to. Because for once in my life, I'm choosing something just for me." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "I think that's awesome." On the morning of my departure, I stood in my living room and looked around at the home where I'd lived for 47 years. The home where I'd raised my children, mourned my husband, grown old. There were ghosts in every corner, some sweet, some bitter. Caroline and David had both offered to drive me to the airport, but I'd arranged for a car service instead. Their half-hearted offers felt more like attempts to assert control than genuine desire to help. Besides, I didn't want my last moments in America to be filled with their doubts and warnings. Eleanor and I met at the airport, both of us giddy with anticipation. "Ready for our grand adventure?" she asked, linking her arm through mine as we wheeled our suitcases toward the check-in counter. "More than ready," I replied, and meant it. The flight was long, but the anticipation kept my spirits high. I watched movies I'd never had time for, read the first half of a novel without interruption, and sipped wine while peering out the window at the clouds below. By the time we landed in Florence, I was exhausted but exhilarated. The Italian spring air was soft and scented with flowers as we emerged from the airport to meet our program coordinator, Sophia. "Benvenuti in Italia," she greeted us warmly. "Welcome to your new adventure." The drive to Montepulciano was like entering a dream. Rolling hills of vineyards and olive groves stretched in every direction, dotted with cypress trees and ancient stone farmhouses. The medieval town itself, perched on a limestone ridge, looked like something from a fairy tale with its terracotta roofs and stone walls. My host family, the Rossis, welcomed me with open arms. Francesca and Antonio, both in their 60s, kissed me on both cheeks and immediately insisted I call them by their first names. Their home, a 3-story stone house near the town center, was warm and inviting, filled with books, pottery, and the most delicious smells from Francesca's kitchen. That first night, as I sat at their dining table sharing a meal of homemade pasta and local wine, with the windows open to let in the evening breeze and the sound of neighbors chatting in the street below, I felt something inside me unfurling. A tension I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there began to release. "Mangia, Linda, mangia," Francesca encouraged, piling more pasta onto my plate. "In Italy, food is love." I took a bite, savoring the rich flavors of tomato and basil. "It's delicious," I told her sincerely. "Tomorrow, I teach you to make it," she declared, her English accented but clear. First lesson in Italian living. Later, as I settled into my room with its view of the moonlit countryside, I realized I hadn't thought about Caroline or David all evening. For the first time in decades, I had stepped fully into my own life, without reference to theirs. I was no longer just a mother, a widow, or a burden to be managed. Here, in this ancient town thousands of miles from home, I was simply Linda, a woman on an adventure, with an entire life still waiting to be lived. 6 months passed like a beautiful dream. I learned to make pasta from scratch with Francesca, picked olives with Antonio, and spent countless evenings in the town square with Eleanor and our growing circle of Italian friends. I took watercolor classes and filled sketchbooks with paintings of the Tuscan landscape. I drank wine at sunset and learned to savor the slower pace of life. Most importantly, I rediscovered pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. The young woman who once loved poetry. The girl who dreamed of seeing the world. The person I might have become if life hadn't narrowed my path so dramatically after Robert died. My children's calls became less frequent as the months passed. At first, they checked in weekly, their conversations filled with thinly veiled skepticism about my Italian experiment, as David called it. By month 3, they'd settled into monthly calls that felt more like obligations than genuine interest. Only Ethan maintained regular contact, eagerly awaiting my photos and stories. In July, my program coordinator approached me with an unexpected question. Linda, would you be interested in extending your stay? The Rossis have specifically requested you remain with them. They've grown quite fond of you. The offer was tempting. I'd found a sense of belonging in Montepulciano that I hadn't felt in years. But something told me it was time to go home, not to retreat, but to reclaim my life there with my new perspective. I think it's time for me to return, I told her. But please thank the Rossis for their kindness. My last evening in Italy, Francesca prepared a feast. Friends from the program and the neighborhood gathered in the Rossi's garden, now in full summer bloom. We ate, drank, and shared stories until the stars emerged in the clear night sky. You have changed, Linda, Francesca observed, refilling my wine glass. When you arrived, your eyes were sad. Now they sparkle. Italy has been good for me, I admitted. She shook her head firmly. Not Italy. You. You have been good for you. As I packed that night, I realized she was right. The transformation wasn't about the location, it was about finally giving myself permission to live on my own terms. I returned to America on a sweltering August day. No one met me at the airport, I hadn't told my children exactly when I'd be arriving. I wanted these first moments back on American soil to belong to me alone. My house stood just as I'd left it, though with a slight musty smell that dissipated once I opened all the windows. I unpacked slowly, placing my Italian treasures around the house, hand-painted ceramic plates, bottles of olive oil from Antonio's Grove, watercolors of the Tuscan countryside that I'd framed in inexpensive wooden frames from the market. The next morning, I drove to a local real estate agency. I'd like to sell my house, I told the surprised agent. And I'm looking for something smaller. Walking distance to town would be ideal. My children's reactions were predictable. Caroline arrived unannounced the moment she heard, her eyes wide with disbelief as she took in the "for sale" sign in the front yard. Mom, you can't be serious, she protested, following me into the kitchen where I was preparing espresso in the stovetop pot Francesca had given me. This is our family home. It's my home, I corrected gently. And it's too big for me now. But what about holidays? Where will everyone stay when we visit? I poured the fragrant coffee into small cups. Hotels work wonderfully for that. Or the new place might have a guest room. 1. David's approach was different, he attempted logic. Mom, this is a terrible market to sell. And downsizing doesn't make financial sense at your age. What about your equity? I've consulted with my financial advisor, I informed him, enjoying his surprise at learning I had one. This is the right move for me. The house sold quickly. I found a charming 2-bedroom condominium in a historic building downtown, walking distance to shops, restaurants, and a small park where an artists group met weekly to paint. On moving day, as the last boxes were being loaded into the truck, Caroline made one final appeal. I don't understand why you're doing all this, she said, her voice tinged with frustration. Ever since that trip, you've been different. I paused, considering how to explain. Do you remember when you were little, and I used to tell you that story about the bird who forgot she had wings?" She nodded, a flash of genuine emotion crossing her face. "The one who spent her whole life walking because she'd forgotten she could fly." "That was me," I said simply. "I forgot I had wings." Italy helped me remember. A week after I settled into my new home, I invited the family for dinner. To my surprise, they all came: Caroline and her family, David and his, even my sister Margaret, who lived 2 states away and rarely visited. As I set the table with my new Italian dishes, I could hear them whispering in the living room, probably concerned about my mental state. "Dinner is served," I announced, bringing out a platter of handmade ravioli that Francesca had taught me to prepare. The conversation was strained at first, but as the meal progressed and the wine flowed, the tension began to ease. Even David seemed to relax as he helped himself to seconds. "This is wonderful, Mom," he admitted. "I didn't know you could cook like this." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I replied with a smile. "But I'd like to change that, if you're interested." By dessert, a traditional tiramisu, I felt ready for what I needed to say. "I want to be clear about something," I began, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I love all of you. That hasn't changed. But how I live my life has changed. I won't be available for last-minute babysitting anymore. I won't drop everything when you call. I have my own activities, my own friends." Caroline started to protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm not disappearing from your lives. I'm simply claiming my own. You're welcome here anytime, with advance notice. I hope you'll want to know the real me, not just the mother and grandmother who's always available when convenient." There was a long silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, Ethan raised his glass. "To Grandma Linda," he said, his young voice strong and clear. "Who went to Italy and came back with wings." One by one, the others raised their glasses, some more hesitantly than others. But they raised them all the same. As I looked around the table, I knew some things would never be completely healed. The letter David wrote would always exist between us. Caroline's cruel words at Christmas would always echo somewhere in my heart. But I also knew something else with absolute certainty: I was finally free. Not from them, but from the need to be defined by them. At 72, I had finally learned to fly.